This is the Section 504 and IDEA webinar, doing a comparison. And I'm going to just go to our introduction slides so you can meet us. And Dana, take it away.
Hello. Thank you all for joining us today. Sorry for all the little technical difficulties. Sometimes Zoom can be that way. So my name is Dana Archuleta. I am a Utah Program Improvement Planning Systems Specialist. So we cut it down to UPIPs because that's a lot to say. I have been with the board for a little over 3 years now. Before that, I taught for 10 years at the New Mexico School for the Visually Impaired, and then 12 years at Albuquerque Public Schools. Then I moved up to Utah and worked as a special ed director for a charter school in northern Ogden. And when I'm not working, I enjoy spending time with my family, camping and boating. I've recently started building Lego sets, and then I bought myself an Oculus for Christmas. Well, I bought my family an Oculus, and that's been really fun to play on.
What is an Oculus? I can Google it.
It's a virtual reality set.
Oh, it's really funny to watch people play with those.
Yes.
I do have to say that. Great TikToks on that. All right. So, and I will totally play Lego sets with you. So Holly Bell here. I am the Utah State Board of Education Student Family Rights Specialist. I am the Section 504 specialist. So if I haven't had a chance to meet you yet, if you're a new coordinator this year, hi, it's me, and I'm the one that sends you emails all the time. And I have a master's degree in school counseling. That was the first 10 years of my life in education. I spent those first 10 years in Jordan School District. I was a school counselor for 8 years and then 2 years as the district school counseling specialist. And I have been at USB for 4.5 years now. And when I am not working, I spend time with my family. I'm in a doctorate program in educational leadership and policy, so that takes up most of my time. But I love to travel and work out, try to work out, and practice Spanish, keep my Duolingo streak going. All right, so here are learning intentions for you today. We want to make sure that you understand the relevance of Child Find, Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act of 1973, and the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act and their role in education. You're going to learn all of that in less than 90 minutes. We want you to understand the differences between the two and how they are implemented, and get some resources. And, you're not going to learn it all in less than 90 minutes. We're still working on it, but that's why we're here for you to contact us to get answers to your questions. So what is Section 504? Section 504 is a federal civil rights law under the Rehabilitation Act of 1973. In 2009, the Americans with Disabilities Amendments Act became law and broadened the interpretation of Section 504. And students with disabilities in school settings fall under the civil rights law. This law and the regulations prohibit discrimination on the basis of disability in all school programs and activities in public schools. So all students with disabilities, including those who are covered under IDEA, and it is designed to provide equal access and fairness in general education to students with disabilities through their 504 plan or the non-discrimination provisions. Take it away, Dana.
And what is IDEA? So IDEA is the Individuals with Disability Education Act. It's a law that makes available a free, appropriate public education, or a FAPE, to eligible children with disabilities. IDEA governs how states and public agencies provide early intervention, special education, and related services to eligible infants, toddlers, children, and youth with disabilities. And infants and toddlers birth through age 2 with disabilities and their families do receive early intervention services under IDA Part C, and children and youth ages 3 through 21 receive special education related services under IDA Part B.
Now, this reminds me, I didn't mention there are different subparts to Section 504, and subpart D is the part that governs elementary and secondary education. Would you like to read this definition, Dana?
Sure. So free appropriate public education, or otherwise known as a FAPE, is for the purpose of this section. The provision of a free education is the provision of educational and related services without cost to the handicapped person or to his or her parents or guardian, except for those fees that are imposed on non-handicapped persons or their parents or guardian. It may consist either of the provision of free services, or if a recipient places a handicapped person or refers such person for aid, benefits, or services not operated or provided by the recipient as its means of carrying out the requirements. So basically, you can't charge, I guess, a student with disabilities if you're not doing the same thing for a student with non-disabilities.
And I wish they would update that language. I don't make the
mouthful.
So, but both Section 504 and IDEA, this is the foundation of both of these laws, is an access to free, appropriate public education and removing those barriers. So they have different definitions of what a disability is. Section 504 in the ADA, they define it as a physical or mental impairment that substantially limits one or more major life activities, or has a record of such an impairment, or being regarded as having such an impairment.
And with IDEA, you have those 13 categories, which we will talk about later. And a child is evaluated in accordance with 300-304 through 300-311 as having an intellectual disability, a hearing impairment, and that includes deafness, a speech or language impairment, a visual impairment, including blindness, a serious emotional disturbance, referenced to in this part as emotional disturbance, an orthopedic impairment, autism, traumatic brain injury, other health impairment, a specific learning disability, deaf blindness, or multiple disabilities, and who by reason thereof needs special education and related services.
And remind me, Dana, they've changed emotional disturbance. Hallelujah. What is it called now?
They have, and I have to remember.
The emotional behavioral disorder.
Disability. Disorder. Yeah. Disability or disorder.
Better.
It's emotional behavior, disability, or disorder.
Much better. Okay, so under the definition of a disability in Section 504, the first part for the requirement for eligibility is substantial limitation of one or more major life activities. And these are some examples that the Office for Civil Rights, who oversees this law, these are some of the examples. This is not an exhaustive list, but if I were to be able to ask you this question of which one of these comes up the most in people's minds or foremost, you would say learning. And that is one of the things when we're looking at 504 is not to over focus on learning. There are many major life activities that can be substantially limiting that can put barriers up for a student to access a free, appropriate public education.
And Holly, looking at those major life activities, if you look at that list, those are also things that will go, for looking at children for special education as well.
I always learn when I present with you. All right, let's cover child fine, which is also a law that is applicable to both Section 504 and IDEA. I'm going to have you be the definition reading person, Dana.
Okay, so child find is a legal requirement included in the Individuals with Disability Education Act, or IDEA, and Section 504, that schools identify, locate, and evaluate all children who have disabilities and who may be entitled to special education or 504 services.
You do that so well. Okay, so this is a legal requirement for all of us as educators to actively find students with disabilities who may require special education and related services. So these are some things that some red flags that we have put together for you to think about when you are observing children. And this is really everyone who is part of the education system. And we are supposed to be finding children everywhere. So no matter where they are, if they're being homeschooled, if they are homeless, if they are in a private school, this is more the responsibility of the LEA to put out notices, annual notices for child find. But this is a requirement for all of us. And if you've watched my trainings before, you know I harp on this every single time. So just some things to look for. Under 504, if a student doesn't qualify under IDEA, they might be still eligible for services under 504. If the caregiver is expressing concern, look at their disciplinary records, look at if a disability is known in the past, there's a record or it's suspected when there's a pattern of inattention, look at their grades, if they're not benefiting from classroom instruction, are they seeing an outside healthcare provider or counselor or a counselor, school counselor or school psychologist within the building? And do you see some chronic health conditions? So do they have an individualized healthcare plan? Every student on an individualized healthcare plan, that should be a child find red flag that you should be looking at potentially, because most of them will qualify for some sort of protection from discrimination if they are on an individualized healthcare plan. So keep your eye out for those students. All right. So Dana, are there any questions in the YouTube chat right now? Great.
Not yet.
All right,
Okay, so
let's talk about eligibility.
For IDEA, a student who qualifies for an IEP, so must be a student who is determined to have a disability, must require special education services. And this last part is the one that we talk about when we're out doing monitoring visits. The disability must adversely affect the student's educational performance.
Yes, that is a major difference from Section 504. Now, I often hear people talk about IEP as individualized education plan, but it seems like it's individualized education program. Can you clarify that for me?
It is. It's an individualized education program.
Okay, so it's kind of an erroneous misunderstanding. Okay.
It's a plan, but it is a program.
Okay. All right, for Section 504, a student is eligible if an evaluation shows that the student has a mental or physical impairment that substantially limits one or more major life activities, a record of such an impairment being regarded as such an impairment, as having such an impairment, and whether or not then the impairment cannot be determined without referencing or the ameliorative effects of mitigating measures. And so this means, and I'm going to define it, but this is applicable, mitigating measures is applicable to IDEA as well, correct? We cannot consider the ameliorative effects of mitigating measures with evaluation.
Yes, yes.
And these are some examples of mitigating measures. So so you want to think of your students who are perhaps on medication to control. So for 504, medication that would control their asthma or perhaps mitigate some of the effects of ADHD, or those would be mitigating measures. And when you're doing eligibility, you can't consider those as part of it. You have to consider what the child would, how they would be substantially limited without those. So how would that, anything you want to add for IDEA?
No, that it would be the same thing. You just look at how is all of this affecting that student within the classroom.
Okay, so the evaluation process. Yours is a little more rigorous under IDEA. So I'm going to let you take this and I'll follow up with 504.
Okay, so for IDEA, you have your child find process, and then you will do your interventions, and your interventions do not have to be, we've heard, 6 to 8 weeks that we have to do interventions. You can do start interventions, and those interventions could go for 2 weeks. And if you're seeing improvement, great, keep going with those interventions. If you're not, change up those interventions and try something different. And if you're still not seeing any progress, then that's when you want to do a referral. And then you obtain consent, you send the procedural safeguards to the parents. Your team, I think for IDEA, is a little different for a 504. Your team is going to be definitely your parents, an LEA, someone in the LEA who can speak to that LEA and what they can provide for that student, the special ed teacher, and the regular education teacher. And then for eligibility, you want someone who can speak to that data that was collected when you were doing the testing for the students. So that's gathering your evidence. Then you'll have a meeting and you'll do the data review, determine eligibility. And if that student is eligible, then you will go on to develop an IEP plan or an IEP program and then implement the plan. The same thing, evaluation process must be completed within 45 days. I don't know if that's the same for 504. And then for an IEP, you can evaluate them annually. You definitely have to, but you can also call an IEP meeting. Anyone on that team can call a meeting at any time.
Okay, and don't worry, we're going to break this down for you. But in looking at this just overall outline of the process, it sounds like the only thing that might be specifically different is between child find and referral. You have like a time that you have to put in with pre-interventions and that sort of thing, sounds like.
It's not a specific time, but you do want to show intervention times.
Before the referral.
Before the referral. Yeah.
Okay, so that's not a requirement under Section 504, but oftentimes people think it is, that you have to have a intervention period before you can start an evaluation, which is not correct. So let's look at what data that they have to look at.
Okay, for IDEA, so we do aptitude and achievement tests and grades. The intervention data, what we were talking about from teachers or other school staff. And I want to put this in there also. If a parent asks for an evaluation, you can start the evaluation process and the interventions simultaneously. So you can do that simultaneously. You don't have to wait or start the interventions and then wait for the evaluation process. You can do them at the same time.
Okay, that would apply with 504. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, you can do that at the same time when a parent is requesting an evaluation. And then you're going to look at social or cultural background and adaptive behavior, definitely parent input, and then discipline records if that is applicable.
Now, and I don't have our slides memorized, so I'm going to just ask you questions, right, when they come to my mind. and now they leave my mind, fleeting thoughts that fly away. Oh, so if a parent asks for a referral for an IEP and you don't think that the child needs an evaluation, you have to send an official written notice, correct?
Yes.
Okay. So we don't have an official written notice in 504.
And always make sure if you are declining that, just make sure there is a form for it and make sure that you document.
Well, and just overall, we recommend with 504, because there aren't a lot of regulations, specific regulations, we recommend that you follow IDEA as best practice as much as you can. So in cases like this, you do need to send them notice, but there's no official form, but you need to send them their procedural safeguards, and we'll talk about that. So as far as data goes that you look at for 504, like Dana was saying, we have to consider multiple sources. You cannot just pick one source to make your determination. And you can use the same assessments that you use for an IEP. If you have a psychologist that's available that can evaluate a student for 504, then you can utilize that test. If they're willing to give that to a student who is being evaluated for 504. And so really a lot of these are the same, except when there's physical conditions, there are major medical conditions. That's a little bit different, that typically doesn't go into IDEA territory. So here's some options, but there isn't anything official. You have more official tests that have to be done for certain categories and things, don't you?
We do. There are certain things for certain categories. There are certain requirements that need to be followed and we need to see. And Holly, we do have a question. Okay. Is there a limit as to how often you can meet with the 504 plan?
There is not a limit to how often. OCR, so the Office for Civil Rights, says it can be requested at any point in time, but typically not meeting more than once a year. And if we're looking at a 504 plan and just making simple amendments, a team does not have to formally meet. Once that plan is put together by a 504 team, if you want to make some amendments, you don't have to do that in a formal fashion, as long as you've discussed it as a team and agree on an amendment and you're notifying a parent that you've done that. You can do that without meeting, but honestly, anytime it's requested and the team feels like it's necessary to pull together. I mean, there's not even a regulation on how often you have to meet. It's just that it's that you are doing this on a regular basis. There's specific language that we're going to get to. Okay, so this is both of us. Dana,
yes. So the team, as I would say, is a parent, an administrator, the special ed director could be in there. And then for 504s, the 504 coordinator, teachers, both general and special education. And for IDEA, it is required that that general education teacher attends the meeting, because we want them there to speak to that general education curriculum. Then someone who can explain evaluation results, so a school psychologist, individuals who are knowledgeable of placement options, related services, personnel as needed, so your SLPs, your OTs, PTs, and then a school nurse if needed also.
So these are required members. 504 has very nondescript requirements for members of the 504 team. So that you can see here, I say the suggested members. There are required, and they're with the little asterisk that says someone who can explain the evaluation results and individuals who are knowledgeable of placement options. And then any of these other individuals just need to be knowledgeable of the child. So yes, the fact that the parent does not need to be involved on the 504 team is a fact that surprises most people. You need to make sure that you're providing notice. There are we talked a little bit about notice, and I'll tell you what the requirements are in notice, but they are not required to be on the team. They are required to provide, you have to get their consent to evaluate, but they don't have to be a member of the team. So you want to pick members of the 504 team that could speak to the individual needs of the child. And so it's just that they have knowledge of the child, they can explain the evaluation results, and they know placement options. Go for it, Dana.
Okay. So for an IEP, we review the meeting structures, review special education eligibility categories, and there are 13 of them. Determine what areas the student requires specially designed instruction. We shorten that to SDI. We have a lot of little acronyms in special ed. So SDI, review the student data, collaborate with the student's IEP team, and decide where the student needs the most support. Create goals in the areas the student requires SDI, and then decide on service times, accommodations, if the student will need extended school year, and how the student will participate in the state assessments and LEA assessments.
We don't have a lot of acronyms in 504. We don't have a lot of instructions in 504.
Compared to IDEA, 504 is pretty loose.
I have seen your rules, and isn't it like 300 pages?
Yes.
And ours is 2.5.
Yeah.
Pages, 2.5. And in subpart D. And so they are looking at changing the regulations. I don't know how many pages they're going to add to it. So Section 504 does not have categories. It's really just a matter of substantial limitation of major life activities, and which those major life activities were suggested examples. And so when we get together as a meeting, I am definitely someone who likes structure. So like I said, try to maybe have things look similar to the IEP. So you go in and you review the data, and you decide if they meet the definition of a person with disability. This is a non-discrimination law. So the first thing you need to establish is if they have a disability. That's step one. And then if they qualify, you decide if they need, the language in the regulation says related aids and services. So it doesn't say accommodations anywhere in subpart D, but I've seen it in case law. So they might just be eligible for non-discrimination provisions, which is what I'll explain, but they might be qualifying for a 504 plan that contains related aids and services and accommodations that meet the individual needs. So.
Okay, so here are those categories under IDEA. So you have autism, deaf blindness, developmental delay, emotional. I know we changed that, emotional.
Yeah, I put it in there.
Yes, and hearing impairment, including deafness, intellectual disability. There's multiple disabilities, or orthopedic impairment, other health impaired, especially specific learning disability, which is SLD, speech language impairment, traumatic brain injury, and visual impairment. And there are certain requirements in our laws under each of those categories.
And as I said, with 504, the categories are none. All right, but here are the general non-discrimination provisions for all students with disabilities. So this covers all students, including those with an IEP. They have protection from non-discrimination with any program and physical accessibility, protection against retaliation and harassment, reasonable modifications if needed and related to the past disability. So if something comes up that was in the past but does not require a plan, you can make some reasonable modifications. And procedural safeguards, which are not clearly outlined in the Office for Civil Rights, but they're a really good idea. So that is what all students with disabilities have protections available to them. The plans.
Okay. So an IEP is a legal document under the United States law that is developed for students who need special education services. And it's developed by the team, which does include the child's parent. And that is one thing when we go out on monitoring visits, we really look for that parent involvement in the whole IEP process. The local education agency, so district or charter, and personnel who are knowledgeable about the child's needs. So you definitely want the general education teacher in there, and it is part of the law. And then students receive specially designed instruction in the areas where their disability, again, adversely affects their progress in the general education curriculum.
And I'm going to say that with the federal law under Section 504, there may not be that parent requirement, but if you look at laws in Utah, statute in Utah, really the parent rights are such a fundamental part of education, and so it really is important to take care to involve the parents. That might not be a federal requirement, but just keeping in mind that they do have the fundamental right to educate their child or be a part of that education process. So OCR might not come down on you for that, but it's just generally good practice to involve the parents, who is typically the most knowledgeable party as far as knowing what the child needs and being able to provide observations. And you do have to consider the parents' observations as part of the process of creating or determining eligibility and creating a plan. So a 504 plan is also legal. It does not, there's nothing stating that you should even, that you have to write it down, but that is kind of a ridiculous notion not to, because you are beholden to the plan once you create the plan as a team. And so it's how a school will support a student with disability and remove barriers to learning. So this is about access to free, appropriate public education. So it covers any condition that limits daily activities in a major way. And it's developed by a multidisciplinary committee of persons who are knowledgeable of the student, the meaning of the evaluation data, and the placement options. And it contains individualized related aids and services designed to provide equal access to general education programs. And as I stated before, not every student who is eligible will have a 504 plan.
And we do have another question.
Okay.
When or would you ever have a student have an IEP and a 504?
Do you want me to answer that, or do you?
Yes, I do.
Okay. Hopefully never, because there's not a need. Any type of related aid, like I said, the actual language in 504 is special education and related services, or related aids and services, depending on what piece you're talking about. So any of those things, call them accommodations, related aids and services, can be put into an IEP if a student qualifies for that. Or not the only distinction, but the major distinction is the specially designed instruction. Right. So you can put anything else from the 504. That's unnecessary paperwork, unnecessary meetings. It's unnecessary. And students who have an IEP are covered under Section 504. You should never have two plans. No one's going to come after you and say you've double planned this student, but it's just really not necessary. Anything you want to add to that, Dan?
Nope, that's exactly. And sometimes, again, when we go out and we're monitoring, we hear, oh, well, this student has a 504 and an IEP. And
that's Same thing.
Okay, why? Because it's just extra work that you're putting on yourself that you don't need.
Well, and you have to adhere to both of them.
Right.
So
Mhm.
that's confusing.
Right.
You could just package them all together.
Yeah, whatever would be covered in a 504 for a student should be in the IEP. So
Now, an individualized healthcare plan is different. Those need to be
It is.
separate from any
Yes.
of these. And there's a lot of reasons behind that, but from either plan, the IHP needs to be separate.
Yes.
All right, what are related aids and services?
Okay, related aids and services. So we have our speech services, occupational therapy, physical therapy, behavior services, and I just put a note in here, one-on-one aid is not a service. Now, behavior support is a service. So in the minutes, we don't want to go out and see one-on-one aid and have minutes there. But you could put as a related service behavior support and have minutes there. And then transportation and life skills also.
That's right. You have to count minutes. Huh.
Yes.
Well, and I guess you could write that into a 504 plan, a certain number of minutes for certain related aids and services. You could write that into a plan. It's just not a requirement. And for section 504, this is all part of FAPE, and it's not defined, but in case law, it's generally understood to include the same related services as what Dana has talked about under IDEA. So the legal principles regarding the identification of specific related services are substantially similar. So if you are deciding, you can look at similar factors to make your determination of what those should be. And some examples under 504 would be so I do want to say, this comes up a lot. Speech services, occupational therapy, physical therapy, all of those on the IDEA side can be applied to section 504. And this comes up a lot, especially with speech services. So if you look at all the case law, as long as the speech services are not addressing individually or specially designed instruction, we have students with speech impairments that need speech services based, in a 504 plan. Do you have money to cover them? No, but not from the federal government, but hopefully you put that into your potential budget for students who are on a 504 plan that require these related aids and services. So here's some of the other examples, since we're talking more about perhaps disabilities that don't require specially designed instruction. You've got medication, administrative medication, other health-related services around that, athletics and extracurricular activities, one-to-one A2 managed behavior, and then, as I stated, the speech, occupational, physical therapy. I would be surprised if there were no questions on this one.
We have one question. Can dysgraphia show academic need in written expression and fall under IEP services? So that is really, it's a team decision. And the IEP services, so you can put it under written expression or writing if that's what you determine the student is being adversely affected by that disability in.
Notice the word required.
Yes. So these forms are all on the USB website. So these are our model forms. And this is the referral form for special education services. And then we have our prior written notice and consent for evaluation or reevaluation form. And again, we have a whole list of forms on our website under the model forms area. Okay, and then
And your procedural safeguards is pretty long.
yes, it is. Yeah, we always tell parents, if you can't sleep at night, just here you go. And then the procedural safeguards are something that they have to be offered every year. And we know parents are like, oh, no, I don't, I know I've been to a million meetings, but it's still probably best practice. It's not required, but it's best practice that you probably go over, just summarize them for the parent, even though they're like, yeah, I know, I've been to this.
So these are suggested 504 forms that I put on the website that you do not have to use them, but they are available to you if they would be helpful. There's the Section 504 referral form. And I just want to say, I always recommend you document everything, anything and everything, because in the event that you need to defend yourself in a court case, or if OCR comes to investigate, I mean, that's the worst case scenario, but ultimately you just want to have good documentation for supporting the child and the parent. So these are some forms that we have if you would like to use them. There's many on there, but that's the referral form. And then this is the consent form. So you do need to get parent consent. You can use this. And then you, as I stated, you have to send a notice of rights. This is something that is required under Section 504. And that just means, hey, we're going to evaluate your child. And then an opportunity that they have an opportunity to review any relevant records. So this is under FERPA. They have the right to an impartial hearing with an opportunity for participation by the parent or guardian and the student, representation by counsel, and a review procedure. So that is what is required in the notice of rights to parents, parent or legal guardian. Okay, any questions about, we've done the whole evaluation process. Okay.
No, we did have one, and I answered it about with the dysgraphia, if they could be classified under SLD. And my response is if they meet all the requirements under that category, and that's what the IEP team feels is the best category, then yes.
And 9 times out of 10, my response to most questions is it's a team decision.
Yes, I was just going to say it's an IEP team decision. And just as long as you can back up that decision if you're ever questioned.
Yes, exactly. That's why you want to keep documentation.
Yes.
Okay. So after, if we've developed an IEP or 504 plan, now what happens? Do you want to take this one, Dana?
Mm-hmm. So make sure that once the IEP is drafted and complete, that you give the list of responsibilities, so accommodations, goals, to everyone who is a part of that team, because they will be working with that student too, and they need to implement those goals and those accommodations. So, and any changes that come up, if the team meets again, make sure that all of the team members, including the parents, get a copy of the new goals or new accommodations, whatever has changed in that IEP. Review the plan with the staff, and then for the IEP, you'll be getting the signature at the meeting. And this verifies that they've received and understand how to implement the plan. For IEPs, it does not, in Utah, does not signify that they agree or disagree with the plan. It's just saying that they were there. And then schedule check-ins with teachers to review how things are going, especially those accommodations. And especially if under the direction of a special ed teacher, that you have a general ed teacher or a paraprofessional doing that SDI. So just make sure that you're always getting feedback.
Well, and since not all teachers are required to be at 504 meeting, I always recommend that you get a signature that they got a copy of the plan. I mean, one of the reasons is because you might get a parent complaint that says they never got a copy of the plan, and you have a signature that they did get a copy of the plan. So, and it's really important that they understand what the plan is saying. So you do a personal check-in with them. You don't just give them the plan. These are individualized plans. So you want to make sure they know what the individualized needs are of the student. And be sure to be careful with confidentiality of the student. This plan should only go to those who are going to be implementing the accommodations or related dates and services. It shouldn't just be generally distributed to all of their teachers, or if it's not applicable to that class or that function, then keep the child's information confidential. I think usually they can see a little flag that a child has one. In most student information systems, it will flag that child, but they don't need to know the details and have access to all that information. So there are ways we can support educators. They've got a lot of students. 504s have exploded. I don't know about IEPs if they've been increasing, but
They have been, yes.
So they have a lot on their plate and a lot to keep track of. So we can support them in implementing the plans. But some of the things you mentioned, providing training, staff meetings, as appropriate. And in general about Child Find, they should know that they have a responsibility to identify students, and they are in a primary, teachers in the classroom are in a primary position to observe and to make referrals, and just giving them access to materials and resources, including them in the evaluations and the review meetings, and scheduling check-ins. So you mentioned a lot of those. Has anyone ever refused to follow a plan? Oh wait, yes, there's legal cases of that.
Yes.
But sometimes they have a good reason. They're in the class, they're working with the student, and they say, this intervention is not effective. Like I'm not seeing any progress. I'm not seeing this making an impact. But instead of just saying, well, I'm not going to do it anymore, you bring that information to the team, because they are responsible for implementing the plan to fidelity. Otherwise, it's non-compliance or discrimination. And so maybe call a new meeting, just making sure that everyone knows, hey, if this isn't working for this child, will you please tell me? And we can bring it to the team.
We have another question.
Okay.
Would a student qualify for a 504 if the parent thinks that the student has a gaming addiction and requests that they have a plan that states no use of technology?
I just talked about this with someone, and this is a little more complicated, but the overall, like 90% of the time that I would say is it's a team decision looking at the available data. So the one thing that came up with this, though, is when you're dealing with addiction, this is hard because you're talking about technology that is really embedded in our education system at this point and in our society. So we don't want to over accommodate students, but when we're dealing with addiction, that's something that we need to consider that as a condition. And so I've had people try to make plans that are like, okay, we're just going to limit the technology. Well, the team needs to look at the data, and if they're saying if a healthcare provider, and then I don't remember did they say there was a healthcare provider that said there was an addiction, or just the parent?
No, just the parent.
Okay, well, that's something to take into consideration too. Parents are not diagnosticians unless they are. I don't. there are medical parents with medical degrees, but still, you need to consider like the information you've received. And if this child legitimately has an addiction, you wouldn't want to say, hey, we have this child is addicted to alcohol, we're going to give them a little bit of alcohol. Like, you really have to just look at the data you have available and go according to that, and not just that, you know, you're going to have other things you have to look at. So there's no just distinction, but yes, there are technology addictions. If I were on a 504 team, I would probably, you have to take into account what that parent is saying, but definitely if there are other evaluations that you could do, or you can't require diagnosis, of course, but and there are cases of over accommodating. So if you are totally restricting a student from technology, and that's not going to be beneficial for them to access their education, because they have to get access to the general education like other students have, then you have to weigh that balance. So this is a tricky one, and it actually came up this week. But a lot of them are tricky because they're not very straightforward. And we seem to have new conditions coming up a lot, especially with social media and its impact on mental health. And so there's no easy answer, but basically it's a team decision based on the data available. And, you know, the parent can't make that determination of the plan. They can appeal it, they can file for a hearing, they can, you know, they have those rights, they can file with the Office for Civil Rights. But if the team decides like totally cutting off technology is not what is going to meet the needs of this child, then the team has the right to do that, make that decision.
Okay, so reevaluation and review. So IEPs are held at least annually to keep track of the child's educational progress. But as I said before, anyone on the IEP team can ask for a meeting at any time. And then every 3 years, we do a reevaluation to determine if that student is still eligible for special education. And reevaluations can also be done early if the team deems necessary.
And for Section 504, annual review is recommended. Now, this doesn't need to be as a team. You can pull out the plans and review them and just kind of, I mean, depending on how you know the child, to just do a review of them. But periodic reevaluation is required, especially it's required if there is a change in placement. And some teams choose to go the IDEA route and reevaluate every 3 years. But as I stated before, the parent or the public agency can request a reevaluation more frequently, but not more than once a year. Reevaluation, not review, but reevaluation. There's a difference between the two. Unless they agree otherwise, like Dana said, if they want to reevaluate and they agree then they can go ahead. But always if there's a change in placement meaning like they're going from instruction in the classroom to instruction at home, or to even when they're going to a different level, like from middle school to high school, I think it would be good to reevaluate. You need to do that when there's a change placement. Transfer student requirements. So if we get a student who's coming in from, whether it be out of state, out of district, within the district to your school, you need to enroll that and consult with the parent, but you have to adopt that plan when the student comes in as it is, to the best of your ability. If you absolutely do not have a service that's in there, I mean, you have to do it to the best of your ability by meeting with the parents, discussing what's on the plan, and it needs to be comparable. That's what we need to make sure that they can access FAPE using comparable services. Until you're able to gather some data and develop a new plan, that you need to adopt it as is when they come to your building. It's a document that follows them wherever they go.
and the same is true with IEPs. You can adopt their current IEP until you have enough of your own data to create a new one. SLD, so specific learning disability, is the only one that is different, because in Utah, different LEAs use different methods. So if a student comes in that is under SLD under the combination method and your PSW, you want to make sure that that student is still eligible under your what you use, your determination method. So you want to make sure that yes, they came in under combination, but under PSW, or do they still qualify?
And I want to caution you too, if you say to a parent, well, we don't have a school nurse, so we can't provide that service. That's not allowable. You have to get you have to get a school nurse then, or it depends on if it's a delegated task that they can, a registered nurse can train someone else in the school to do or whatnot. But there really is very little leniency on the services that align with that plan. You know, you really need to follow the plan as is, even if it includes getting staff that you don't have on hand. They don't have, at least OCR really couldn't care less if you say, I don't have the budget. They're not flexible with that. So
okay. We have another. Please address related services for students only under a 504 when all related service providers are paid out of SPED funds, with the exception of school nurses.
Then you have to pay for those individuals out of the general fund. So any provider, an occupational therapist, physical therapist, speech, I think I can't speak to speech therapists and what funding that they are paid under, because sometimes they're school staff and I don't know if they're totally funded through IDEA funds. If they are, then they should not be providing services to 504 only students, but they have to find the money to pay for those individuals out of the general budget. Good news. Do you want to cover this?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay. So this is kind of an overview of the transfer process. The parents can provide copies of the original plan. Can't always rely on that, but they can provide you with that. You can request the file directly from the previous LEA. I think that this is a requirement under IDEA, right? That you request it.
And I know it's an issue throughout the state on getting files in a timely manner.
Yeah.
One thing, I was talking to an LEA yesterday. What I used to do is, if you have access to Data Gateway, I would go in when you get a new student, and you can look on there and see if they've had an IEP previously.
Oh,
that was one way I would try and get ahead of it.
And they don't record 504 plans at the state level. They record if they have a 504, but not any plans.
Right.
People have asked me, can I get a copy of my plan? I say, you have to contact the LEA, like that. They don't hold that information at the state level. Okay, so you need to establish a team and convene a meeting as soon as possible. And it's not that when this team gathers together that they're going to be able to make decisions. They don't know the child yet, but at least they can talk about the child, look at the plan, and make the plan for interventions, or how they're going to evaluate this child and monitor this child as they go through, providing the existing interventions, and then they'll regather at a determined point. Comparable services provided. Just making sure that you're the responsible one, that if the student exits your building, that you try to make sure that file follows them and do the other LEA or school of service by helping that process along. But making sure it's separate, you want to keep that information confidential. And then I get this question a lot: how long do we retain records? It's the same for both. I think under IDEA, it's actually a requirement that you keep it for 3 years after transfer or graduation, and it's a strong suggestion for 504 to do the same. And it doesn't have to be a physical copy. You can upload it electronically. Yeah. Okay. Any questions before you all get put to the test here?
No, I think we're good on questions.
And you can just think to yourself. You don't have to put an answer in the chat. All right. So here's a case, a 504 case that went to the OCR, the Office for Civil Rights. So this parent sought to participate in a 504 meeting. She had attended previous meetings, but this time the district didn't invite her. They said that given her daily communications with the district, the team would be more productive without her. The assistant principal and school counselor met with the parent to discuss her requested accommodations a month before the team meeting. The team meeting included the assistant principal, counselor, nurse, and 4 teachers, and the team discussed all of the parents' requests. Within 2 weeks, the assistant principal and counselor met with the parent to review what occurred in the meeting. So that parent appealed. So they appealed the plan and ensuing a 504 plan internally, and the district accommodated all but one of her requests. So then the parent filed an OCR complaint saying that her exclusion from the meeting it violated 504 that requires placement decisions to be made by a group of individuals knowledgeable of the student. So does the parent's exclusion from the meeting violate section 504? What you think about that? The answer is no. And I'm guessing most of you got this right. Because the plan was created by a group of people knowledgeable of the student, they considered the parent's input. Failure to include her did not violate section 504. But I would say probably need to state it more professionally, then we'd be more productive without you. I wouldn't recommend saying that to a parent, even if it might be true. And that's, I think, under 504, why parents aren't a required member of the team, because there are some circumstances which the parent does sometimes impede the process and does not, their participation does not necessarily benefit the child or moving the evaluation along and providing services. I'm a parent. I always want to be involved with my child, but it does happen sometimes. So just be kind. And she was given her procedural safeguards. Okay, so this.
You want me to take this one?
You take this one.
It said the parent of an Ohio 11th grader with ADHD and oppositional defiant disorder asked the principal to evaluate her son for special education and related services. The student had a history of disruptiveness and verbal altercations and unexcused absences. For example, he was absent for 9 days and missed most of his classes. He had failed all his classes the prior school year. The district issued prior written notice declining to evaluate. The notice explained that the district did not suspect a disability due to a lack of intervention and excessive absences. The prior written notice also stated the district could not rule out lack of instruction due to attendance issues and the cause of the student's struggles, and that it needed to collect response to intervention data. The parent filed a state complaint alleging the district violated its child find obligation under the IDEA. The law provides that a district must evaluate a student if it has reason to suspect the student has a disability and needs special education and related services to address the disability. Okay, does the district's decision not to evaluate violate the IDEA?
I'm giving them a minute to think.
Mhm.
Marinate.
So the answer is yes. The district's decision not to evaluate was based on its inability to first complete the RTI process due to the student's absences. So the combination of absences, failing grades, and behavioral problems was sufficient to create suspicion that the student had a disability for which it required special education and related services. The Ohio Department of Education noted that a district may not use to unnecessary delay evaluating a child when there is reason to suspect a disability and need for special education services. Here, the district had adequate reason for such suspicion. The ODOE pointed that the student obtained all Fs the prior school year, struggled with behaving appropriately, and often missed class or school. And under the circumstances, the fact that the district had not completed its RTI process was no justification for denying an evaluation. And the state ODOE ordered the district to evaluate the student. So those,
This kind of,
yeah, those things, the absences, the failing grades, the behavior problems, those are all those red flags that that should trigger, there's something going on. We need to look into this.
yeah, with 504, the whole like wait and see, like we need to do this first when the evidence is screaming at you. That's not going to go over well when they ask for a hearing or file with OCR. All right, here's an allergy case. So this is a 10th grader in Virginia who had a 504 plan for his allergy, but not for his asthma. So he had several asthma-related absences, and as a result was falling behind in his classes. And realizing that the student likely required additional services, the school counselor sent the parents a letter in September 2014 offering to schedule a meeting. And the counselor claimed that the parents failed to respond. So he sent them 2 more letters. And because the parents didn't answer the letters, the school never had a 504 meeting. So the parents filed an OCR complaint alleging that the district violated Section 504 by failing to reevaluate the student. So does the district violate Section 504 by failing to reevaluate the student? This one's a little tricky. Okay. OCR responded in favor of the parent. So yes, the district did violate Section 504 in this case. They knew they needed to revise the plan. So there was an existing plan. So they had an obligation to convene a meeting, whether if the parent was involved or not. And so the 504 regulations encompass a duty to reevaluate the student when there's reason to believe that the current services aren't adequately meeting the needs of the student. So here, when we look at the absences, attendance, the falling grades, based on the asthma, which is not included in the plan, then that indicated an obligation to reevaluate. And it's great to invite the parents, as we've stated, but sometimes they don't respond. And when a child is, it's, there was immediacy to this, then they needed to schedule the meeting. So they're not relieved of their obligation to meet and reevaluate. It looks like, Dana, that your little puppy there wants to take this last slide.
Yeah. He ran out.
Can I do the same?
Yeah, I know.
Okay, just kidding, people. I love being here with you. Okay, do you want to take this last one?
So RTI is not required prior to initiating a Section 504 or an IEP. The wait and see, as we said, is a violation of the law when there is reason to believe a child needs special education and related services. When a parent or guardian provides documentation from an outside healthcare provider, that does not automatically establish eligibility under 504 or special education. So multiple sources must be considered. Once evaluation is initiated, an eligibility determination needs to be established within 45 school days. And then the 504 team must consist of individuals who are knowledgeable of the student.
I'm assuming that's with an IEP team as well.
Yes. Yes.
And these are just the heavy hitters. These are the ones that come up all the time. Especially the whole, well, I thought I needed a diagnosis, and I didn't know with IEPs that they didn't need one. And so, no, there's never an official diagnosis that needs to be made or provided. And you don't want to require it because then you're responsible for getting that, which can involve a doctor bill and all kinds of things that the parent doesn't have to pay for. But also, parents don't understand that if they bring you that diagnosis or that medical documentation, that you don't have to provide a plan. You don't have to, the child isn't automatically eligible. So this comes up all the time.
And that goes for IEPs too. Just because a student has autism as diagnosed by a doctor doesn't necessarily mean that that student will qualify for an IEP. It has to be adversely affecting him in the classroom.
And for a 504 student, it has to be substantially limiting one or more major life activities. Oh, additional points. So
yeah. Our IEP team consists of parents, special education teacher, regular education teacher, local education administrator, and someone who can speak to the data. It's not necessary, this was a question, to have a separate 504 with an IEP. That's just added work. Section 504, IEP applies to extracurricular activities as well. It applies to any school-sponsored activity, and no medical diagnosis or official paperwork is required for Section 504. And we did have, so just to clarify, if that same situation occurred, but the student did not have a 504 plan, and the team reached out 3 times to get permission to evaluate, the team would need to file due process.
Okay, so if they did not have, I'm going to understand this question as if they didn't have consent to evaluate the student. So if they weren't able to get some kind of parent verbal written agreement saying, yes, you may evaluate my child. So I'm going to answer the question based on that assumption. A school district, an LEA, does have the ability to file a dispute with a parent. So if they disagree, if they think that this child absolutely needs services, they can file due process. And it's very rare because typically you can work with a parent and get at least that consent to evaluate, even if you have to meet without them. But yes, that is a right of the LEA. And here are some of the other forms that I have available. One of the newer ones that I made is an amendment form that's not on here. I tweaked the 504 plan a little bit. I don't remember what I did to it, but it's better. It's new and improved. And I put some other things on there, I put together a form where teachers can kind of record when they're using 504, the accommodations, the things that are written in the plan, that can help them both to document that they are using them. So when they're accused of not using them, which is, they get accused a lot about not following a plan. So they can kind of tally when they're using them, and it can help them record like if they're being effective. So I put together that little, and I'm always open to creating new forms if something would be helpful for you.
And these are the IEP forms. And like I said, we have all kinds of model forms on our website. If you just go to our website and then go to compliance it's on the right-hand corner, and then over to model forms, and there's all the forms you could ever dream of. And we update them yearly. So they're updated every September.
Well, and something came up recently. Someone asked me a question about an OT evaluation, I think, and you had some kind of a form online for this. And some of those can be useful. You can adapt them for 504 if you're trying to do an evaluation for OT and IDEA, if they all have a form on there that can be helpful for you to gather data, you're free to use that. You can adapt it for 504. Because we don't have any official forms like that. So I just said, hey, use that for your data, if that would be helpful. And also, do you have yours in other languages? I know mine are available in Spanish.
We do. Mm-hmm. We do. They are at the Arabic, Portuguese, Spanish, and Vietnamese.
Yeah, for those of you who don't have a 504 budget, neither do I. We have them in Spanish and English.
And there was a question on where can we find the documentation forms?
So for mine, they're on the Educational Equity webpage. I have a 504 page, and we're going to send out, I think at the end here, we've got these websites, and I will make sure that your stuff is on there too. I don't think we have that yet. We don't have that on there, but so Dana and I will pull together the resources. We'll send you these slides. There's also, if you want to get relicensure points for watching this webinar, then I'm going to be sending out a Google form, a participation form. It's just got a few questions to demonstrate that you are actually listening to us, and also your personal information. So I'll send that out. And people are enjoying the 504 Canvas course. Go figure. We've got a lot of people are going through that course, and which is great. It's the only Canvas course I've ever done. So I'm feeling like a winner. But they are watching all of these videos. This one is not going to be put on there, but I've got 7 different videos and different topics. And then you go through and you take a little test and you write a little discussion thing, and then you get 1 USB credit, which hopefully can get you more money if your LEA does that. And so, yes, you'll get links to all of those resources, and hopefully you're on my listserv. So if you haven't been getting my emails, that means you're not on my listserv. Email me and I will make sure you get on that listserv and you get the resources from today. Any other questions? I hope this was helpful. I love talking to Dana and seeing what differences that and similarities there are between the two laws.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Because I was one that believed that you had to have a medical diagnosis for 504s.
And I thought you needed that for IDEA. All right. Well, thank you all. Again, sorry about the technical difficulties. That's life happens. So I hope you all are having a great year and so far to 2023. And I'm thinking to do another webinar on discipline for students with disabilities and behavioral conditions for students. So I'll keep you posted on that. But that's kind of what's churning in my brain right now. And if there's something else that you feel like is screaming that you need, please reach out, and we're open to providing another webinar on any topic. So, all right.
Questions, just email.
Yeah, we're not at our desks a lot.
Yeah. No.
Especially right
No.
now, it's legislative season. All right. Take care, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.